Okay, so let's start. Hello, everyone. Nice that you joined this meeting, this discussion on the Fit for Climate, Fit for 1.5, Fit for what we will see in July. This is the time when the Commission will propose and show us what they want to change in actual legislation to make the Green Deal happening, to put us on speed with the Paris Agreement. And today we want to discuss it. What should be the outcome? What do we expect? What can also citizens expect? And I think this is a really interesting debate because now really becomes substantial. Until now, we talked about the framework, but from July onwards, we will talk about sectoral legislation and policy. And this is where we get into the, well, interesting fights. Today, who will be on the panel? So first, I will moderate. I'm Michael Bloss. I'm a member of the European Parliament from the German Green Party and was responsible for the Greens in the European Parliament for the climate law. And now will work and will be responsible for the ETS, so the emission trading and the carbon price. We have with us, more importantly, Brigitta Boschjo, I hope I pronounce it well. She's the Climate Policy Coordinator of Climate Action Network Europe. Climate Action Network Europe is one of the most important associations of NGOs working on climate and really changing stuff on the European level. And she focuses with her work on the effort sharing regulation. So that's how different member states are obliged to improve their climate action. We have Andreas Graf, project manager on EU energy policy with Agora Energiewende. And Agora Energiewende is a think tank that always gives very sharp and precise and well thought through policy analysis and proposals. In Germany, we, as the Greens at least, we always look into what is the next proposal, the next report from them, because yeah, that's really sharp analysis. We have Susanna Karp. She's the political strategy director at Bellona Europe and has been fighting a lot of fights in the climate policy in Europe and also achieving a lot of great successes. I always turn to Susanna when I have detailed question on the ETS and how it works. Susanna is the one who I at least rely on. So really looking forward to this panel, really interesting panelists. Let me just give you a quick heads up and understanding how I see the thing right now politically. So basically, we have been seeing the Green Deal as this, big thing of Ursula von der Leyen and the whole Commission to make Europe the first climate neutral continent. Now we are a little bit in a different phase. First of all, we have the US being back in the race. So let's see if Europe really makes it or if the US will be faster than us. And secondly, we have been seeing already some of the policy proposals that made it more concrete. And I have to say, I'm not very much impressed by what actually has been put on the table. If you look at the agricultural policy, so the biggest budget from the European Union, there we see really little improvements for the climate and for the environment altogether. And that's really a shame because there's a lot of emissions coming out of the agricultural policy. We have been seeing the fight now about the taxonomy for sustainable financial products. So that means it's some kind of, what is a green financial product label? And there was big fights that gas and nuclear are not being labeled as green, and it's still not over. And then we see the climate law, where the European Parliament had a really good and progressive proposal, 60% less CO2 emission for the year 2030. And actually, the Commission and the member states did not help us. And in the end, the Parliament really had to back down with most of its progressive proposals. And in the end, it was basically a climate target of 52.8%. of real emission reduction, and that's even outside of the scope of the Paris Agreement. So we have to be better than that. So currently, basically from this big, nice thing of the Green Deal, we see that policy-wise, it's actually not that nice, and we have to save the Green Deal. This is what we want to do. Of course, we can do this best by changing the political landscape. For instance, Germany, which is one of the big, how do you say, blockers of a really progressive climate policy. But hopefully we will have a green government in Germany soon, and then also the Green Deal. It will be much easier what will come out of it. But this is now only the framework. What now comes on the 14th of July is a huge package with 12 different laws for different sectors, you know, coal, cars, renewable energy, a lot of stuff. And here, this is really where the real fights are happening, and where we really need to see progressive policies. And this is what we want to discuss, what is to expect, what also is to expect for the member states, for the citizens, what can we maybe campaign on. And I'm looking forward to entering the debate with you. And first, I would like to ask you, Brigitta, to take the floor and explain to us a little bit what's going on between the member states, which of our green parties in the member states do we need most in order to get a really great July package.
Okay, thanks for the floor, and first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here and be part of this group and talk a little bit more in detail about the 55 package, which is coming up on the 14th of July with 12 legislative pieces, as we know, and two of those define the emission reduction effort of Europe. One of this is the emission trading system, the regulation on this, which deals with big industries and point sources of emission. And the other one is the effort sharing regulation, which defines national targets for all those sectors that are not covered by the emission trading regulation, which is agriculture, road transportation, waste, and small industries and buildings. not to forget the building sector. So recently, you might have seen from the news that the EU Council has put climate on the agenda. And it was because in December, the heads of states agreed that they will come back to the climate files and give us sort of guidance ahead of the Fit for 55 package. And especially the future of the effort sharing regulation was debated, and in December, seemingly they could not agree on some details, and especially by the request of Poland and other Visegrad countries, they wanted to come back to the matter. So it might come as a surprise then that even at the latest council meeting on the 25th of May, the conclusions give very little guidance towards this regulation, and the further discussions and details were again postponed for after the package is released. Many member states from the East, again, they demanded that the Commission comes up with national impact assessment. So, and we have seen that the Commission is promising this for years, and now it's again included in the ICO conclusions. So, especially the Visegrad 4 can now expect maybe some more detailed impact assessment from EU level on their national impact. So we will see how this will play out, but nevertheless, it's clear that already clear that each member state has to significantly increase its target, no matter what kind of impact assessment we are looking for. So a few important points from our point of view from the green NGOs is that we are welcoming this decision to increase the climate target. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that despite this and many other countries increasing their targets, we are still heading towards 2.5 world. So to come closer to the Paris Agreement goal of 1.5, we have to go beyond this. So we see that this upcoming Fit for 55 package actually is a good opportunity to go beyond 55 and be fit for 1.5. So to bring a few more numbers on the table, it would mean that for the effort sharing regulation, we should achieve 70% emissions by 2030, and for the non-ETS sectors, it would mean a 50% cut by 2030 compared to the 2005 levels. So to deliver this enhanced target, it's important to set the right measures, and beyond what I already said, that each member state has to significantly increase its national target. A compliance mechanism should kick in. So make member states accountable and responsible to drive down their emissions. And we believe that the effort sharing regulation will be the core to deliver that. And maybe we will talk a little bit more on the power dynamics between the countries and different positions, but I will conclude here and looking forward to the further discussions and questions.
Okay, thanks a lot, Brigitte. So I understand that every member state needs to do more, increase their own national climate target. And in the effort sharing, it is basically, it says, what does member states need to do and what can be done on the European level? So we come maybe a bit more to the European level, but to the whole package as such. Andreas, you have been, I guess, again, making a lot of analysis of what is on the table there. So maybe you can tell us a bit about, well, what is the big things that we expect in terms of the sectoral policies, and what does it mean for citizens in Europe?
Thank you. And to help answer this question, Michael, I'm just going to use a few slides. Also, just to make it a bit more concrete, just so we're all aware of the scale of the ambition that we have already agreed on and what it would mean to go beyond. So this is an attempt to visualize, based on Commission modeling for the 2030 target so far, what it would actually mean to meet the net 55% target. You can do it differently, more in one sector or the other, but this is just one way of at least getting a sense for what it means. And essentially, to start with energy industry, with power, there's essentially no modeling done that achieves the 2030 target that does not include essentially a full coal phase out by 2030, full stop. So the first thing we did when we heard a higher target was on the discussion, we tried to see how much could you get out of a coal phase out, and you can get quite a bit. It's the most important part of meeting the target is radical or dramatic increase of renewables and phase down of coal as quickly as possible. But it doesn't get you alone to the 55% target. I think that's a very important message. On industry, what it means is we actually have to go beyond just quote unquote efficiency, just carbon pricing, making this or that slightly more efficient in terms of material efficiency, et cetera. We need to go into actually also replacing the fossil fuels we have and switching to electrification as much as possible. And that will in part mean also something that we hadn't been talking about over the last years, which is actually seeing significant amounts of hydrogen, clean hydrogen in industry before 2030, something that is costly. Third, in buildings, we need a kind of a very strong upscaling of renovation, and we need a phase in of heat pumps at a much quicker pace. So electrifying our buildings, replacing those old oil boilers and gas boilers with heat pumps as quickly as possible, and in cities introducing heat networks. And for transport, it means upscaling EVs, of course, also the role of public transport and other mobility modes, but where there are still cars on the road, making them electric as quickly as possible. And agriculture, as Michael has already suggested, is kind of the problem child. The cap was proposed initially before the Green Deal was even proposed. We're still dealing with agriculture ministers falling behind. At the very minimum, we will need a commitment by governments to, in the process, in the coming years, really reorienting agriculture and going a step beyond. So committing to that, so we can have that conversation move forward. So these are the things that are being proposed. It's a big list. The things on the left are what is coming in July. We've already heard it's things like the carbon border adjustment mechanism, but it's also standards and regulations like CO2 standards for cars and rules on rolling out EV charging infrastructure, very important elements for transport decarbonization. It's also going to be a kind of very technical details in the ETS that will enable going beyond just carbon pricing to actually create the support instruments for industry decarbonization, like carbon contracts for difference. These will get very technical, but are absolutely necessary to enable the transition. And then it's all of the cross-sectoral instruments that, including the ones that have already been touched on, the effort sharing regulation, also known as the climate action regulation, ETS, energy taxation directive, renewables directive, efficiency directive, and last but not least, the sinks, essentially directive, the Lulu Cf, that Michael, maybe we can talk about that, but going beyond will also mean going beyond and setting higher targets on increasing our natural sinks. So then finally, there will be a Q4 package that will kind of round out the package formally, which is going to be essentially the gas package. It's going to be the rules that help us phase out gas in buildings and help us decarbonize gas where they still exist, and also put stricter rules on methane leakage. So all of this is coming. And at a very high level, what does this mean? We went through all files that are being proposed in July, and we drew three basic messages. The first is we need a package that in its entirety is focused on three basic principles. The need for environmental integrity, that means that the targets add up, the measures actually deliver meaningful reductions, and if those cannot be demonstrated, we're failing. Second, we need it to actually address serious concerns on social and distributional justice. That's not just households, that's also industry, that's also businesses that want to make the transition but need support for that. So we need the package to be one that actually encourages social and distributional justice. If we're not achieving that, we're failing. And finally, we need to actually certainly go beyond a narrative that is focused entirely on carbon pricing. It will require strict standards, actually putting concrete goals in regulations that require businesses to act, require households to act, and enable a better investment environment for industry to develop the products for us to decarbonize our economy. So regulations are needed. If we're not delivering strict enough regulations, we're failing. So those are the three messages at the highest level. So, I mean, the others really just re-emphasize that, which is we will need, however, also carbon pricing. It is part of the mix. We need to signal, and I'm sure Susanna will go into some of the details on the ETS here. We need to actually be setting the incentive to decarbonize, and carbon pricing can help support, but importantly, again, we will need those strong sectoral policies. We will need those regulations. We will need those targets on renewables development, et cetera, so that we're investing and expanding in a market that actually enables us to achieve these goals. And last but not least, I would encourage everyone to take this to heart, which is that we certainly need to have a conversation that is about enabling change. And we need to also, and I make this mistake. I think everyone in our community, as well as outside of our community, make these mistakes occasionally. We focus too much on the challenges when we really should be focusing on everything that needs to be happening now and how we will accomplish it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Can we just go back to your first slide again, just to bring everybody at the same page? What is this all about? Because I really liked it, and it shows us. So if I understand it correct, so basically, so we have a new target. That means now, like all of the different sectors, they need to change. So we have down here energy sector, industry, buildings, transport. So that's cars, agriculture. So in all of these different fields, we will see European legislation, new European standards, you know, like maybe a market mechanism with the ETS, maybe like a standards, for instance, in the transport sector, where the European Union will say, okay, the fleet of one automotive company can only emit so much CO2. Okay, so that's just for us to, all of us to understand, like it's massive what is coming. It's really massive. It changes our life in many different dimensions. When it comes to, you know, like a CO2 price for energy that is already as high as 50 euros, but Susanna will go deep into it. But also when it comes to, you know, like what if you build a new building, what kind of energy standards it needs to have, so that it's almost like a zero energy building. When it comes to cars, that actually, you know, the automotive companies are possibly forced to phase out a combustion engine, so fossil engines, by between 2030 and 2035, I would say. So this package is all about. It has massive implications on our everyday life and on the European economy as a whole. It's really breaks down this idea of becoming climate neutral to every place where CO2 emissions are being emitted. So just I wanted, I mean, to just stress this again, what kind of big package we will be seeing coming up in July. Sorry to interrupt, but just wanted to make that clear for everyone, because it was already questioned. Okay, what do all of these abbreviations mean? Now, Susanna, you one of the biggest like instruments is this European emission trading market, the system. And what can we expect from this ETS system? What are the political debates that we have here? How can this market drive the industrial decarbonization? How can it drive out, as Andreas already pointed out, coal by the year 2030? Please enlighten us.
Yes, good afternoon all, and thank you so much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to connect to this community, so glad to be here. So maybe just the question, why is the ETS considered the cornerstone of EU climate policy? Well, first of all, it proposes a change to our economic system with a view to incorporating the societal price of climate change onto what we do, right? And so we know climate change is basically caused by a market failure or several market failures. And that's why a proposition like, let's say, like the ETS can be quite successful in helping us tackle the negative externalities of our activities. However, it is also a transposition of a critical principle in the EU treaties, which is the polluter pays principle. This is enshrined in our treaties and therefore should come above all constitutions around the EU or the national legal order. However, the EU hasn't always priced pollution, and I'll get into that shortly. I do want to pick up on this Fit for Climate package coming up in July. And as some of you know, I'm not a big fan of the name for this package, but I will build on the metaphor that the Commission proposes. And it's true that Europe does need to get in shape by 2030 when it comes to its climate policies. And the EU ETS needs to get in shape as well. So for the past 15 years, half of the installations it covers haven't actually been paying the price for their emissions. If you may, they've been living on fast food, right? So they've been getting these free allocations and they've grown in their, let's say, bank accounts, perhaps as a result, but in terms of their emissions, they haven't properly slimmed down as they should have. We do have a carbon price that is finally functioning, and I should say that that's really a very recent feature of this scheme. We fought extremely hard to get this through, and really, we were even told just 3 or 4 years ago ridiculous things such as, if the price is €5 per ton, it just means that's just the price of CO2. That wasn't the case. The price of CO2 is much higher, and it's higher than 50 or 55 euros per ton. But I should mention the current price level is largely due to the pandemic. So if you're looking at the wider set of asset markets, you're seeing that they're doing quite well at the moment. So property prices haven't dropped the way that many people have expected them to drop. Gold is doing quite well. So what's actually happening is that many investors are looking for, let's say, safe places to invest in. And that's why the CO2 price is rising, because indeed the ETS has been fit for dealing with, let's say, crisis or exogenous shocks. But the actual price is not supported by market fundamentals. So what that means is that the moment real economic factors kick in following the pandemic, we could see a rollback in the carbon price. And this is something we simply cannot afford. So the first thing that needs to happen is to find a way to secure the current price, be it through a carbon floor price that could be accompanied with an increased trajectory that should get us to at least 200 euros per ton in 2030, because this would give stability to investors. This would help us make fossil fuels unbankable and uneconomic, which is the only way we're going to phase out fossil fuels, by actually shifting the economics around them and increasing the profitability, the relative profitability of renewables. Now, that's of course happening to some extent, but it just needs to happen much faster and in a way that is safeguarded. Now, very quickly on the innovation aspect of the ETS, and some of my colleagues who spoke earlier referred to this. There are interesting features in the ETS, such as the Innovation Fund that is there to help us. But I want to stress, I looked at the project applications for the Innovation Fund and I counted them up, and I noticed that if you take the 12 countries that are considered to be Central Eastern Europe, and you add up all of the applications that they've submitted for the Innovation Fund, you get to 88 in total for 12 countries. When you add up just France and Germany, you get to 99. And so what I want to stress is that we need to very heavily invest in capacity building in Central Eastern Europe. And we need to have a story that's not about burden sharing or effort sharing, but rather about knowledge sharing. And if we're going to properly be fit for 1.5 or fit for 2030, I'd like to invite all those on the call to become climate fitness coaches, because we're going to need a lot of effort to get there. And last but not least, because I know we'll have a debate, so I'll have plenty of chance to share my thoughts later on as well, but the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Now, that's been a quintessential part of the Green Deal since the Green Deal was presented in November 2019. Now, why is that? And this mechanism has been misunderstood and misportrayed. But if you think about what the Paris Agreement entails for the whole world, you notice that actually Europe is just a small or micro lab for the rest of the world. In other words, because we have such a differentiated economic landscape inside the EU, the EU needs to succeed in this, because if the EU doesn't, the rest of the world won't meet the Paris Agreement. So it's critical that the EU manages to sort of lead the way. And in order to lead the way, it does need a carbon border adjustment mechanism to make sure that its actions don't lead to increased emissions elsewhere. It's about fair trade, the fairness of our trade when it comes to its environmental impact, but it's also an invitation for the rest of the world to join in a collaborative race, because that's the only way we're going to get to the ambitious goals of the Paris Agreement. So we need a carbon border adjustment mechanism to complement the ETS, helping us get rid of the fast foods, the free allocations I mentioned earlier. So I'll stop here and glad to answer any questions.
Okay, I understand. No fast food, and we need to be fitness trainers. I can say that for myself. I really need to be more a fitness trainer. But so if I understand it correct, so if I'm an energy producing plant, for instance, coal, currently I need to pay 50 euros for every ton of CO2 that I emit because of this price. And then if we get the price higher, then at some point, coal is not anymore competitive towards renewable energies, and this is where we need to get. And then there's the polluters pay principle. So one cost of CO2 for the whole society is around, in Germany, 195 euros. And the question is, who pays for this? And if not the polluters pay, someone else is going to pay for this, probably the society. So there are the costs somewhere hidden. Okay. Okay, very, very, very good. So yeah, we have some challenges. The implementation of this huge package is trying to go to this orientation point, the new European climate goal of real emission reduction of 52.8%. That's not yet enough for the 1.5 degree temperature goal. So going to 1.5 degree would actually mean that we need to be even better than the current goal. And then, of course, all of in all different sectors there will be change. And also the question is, which country does how much? What is the fair distribution within Europe, within the society, and who pays the price for it? That's maybe well. Before I enter into the debate, I'm very happy that we are already so many participants. That is all very complex. At least when I tried to enter this whole debate, I had to learn a lot before I understood how this whole system works. And I believe I don't understand completely yet. So maybe first, do you have questions from the audience? Maybe more of an understanding how things work, and please really ask it, because this whole package will have huge impacts on citizens, on voters. And it's important to be able to explain to them what is happening. So if you have some questions, please, there are no stupid questions here. This is a really complex thing. Please ask them if you have questions. But if you don't have questions, and maybe I can say, you can just, there is a reactions button down there, and there you can raise your hand, and this is how I would understand that you have questions. But if you don't have some, maybe we can go more into Horas. Then I think you can just unmute yourself, and happy to take your question.
Sorry, it takes a second. Thank you for the presentations. I have a relatively broad, but I find possibly quite important question, which comes back to the division of this Fit for 55 package and then the ECL conclusion. So basically, after the trilogues, we already have the headline targets for emission reductions in the EU set, and they are not going to change anytime soon, no matter how much we would want that to be the case. And now we are kind of working on the practical measures to get to those targets. To what extent you see possibilities of using this Fit for 55 package to go beyond the emission reduction targets that have been recently set in the European climate law?
I'm glad to.
Yes.
I'm glad to jump in because I think we will absolutely increase the emission reduction target through the sectorial legislation. I should also mention that that has happened before. So a couple of years ago, we had a similar revision phase, not as comprehensive as what we're looking at doing now, but what was able to be done, so to say, was through victories on every single small incremental, let's say, victories through the policy policy files, we actually managed to increase the ambition of the separate carbon budgets. So I personally think that we will actually be able to replicate that system. There will be quite a lot at stake in the upcoming revisions, but I think that's exactly where the point to push, because the overall headline target isn't sufficient. We'll have to actually push forward through the amendments in the sectoral legislation.
Andreas.
Yeah, so I personally do not share this view that in the sectoral legislation, we will somehow be able to, during the negotiations, negotiate something that brings us beyond. Why do I think that? Because we aren't in the position we were in 5 years ago. We are late to the game. It's every moment counts, and we have failed in those moments in the past. So why does that matter? Because our economy doesn't shift overnight. We can't replace everything overnight. What we can do is create an environment where we accelerate. And we accelerate so that in the time up to 2030, we're going quicker and quicker, and we're going beyond what people think is possible after 2030. So we shift the focus from 2050 to 2045, 2040, and we make it something where we are accelerating. If the plan is to negotiate higher targets that might not be agreed until 2023, and then member states start implementing it, it's bound to fail, because it is simply the scale of change we're talking about. It is not something you can deliver overnight. And here's maybe one more thing. I think we really need to start talking about this as something that isn't delivered after we agree to a deal. It's delivered from today. It's something where all of our conversations have to be in the national capitals, that even though we don't have agreement, even though the ink hasn't dried, we know the direction in which it's headed. The heads of state and government have agreed to a target, and the basic commitment has to be to go far beyond what has already been agreed in the past. And some countries are living up to that already, some aren't, but all of them have to be pressured to do more.
Okay. Brigitte also wants to chip in on this already.
Yeah, I agree with what Andreas just said with the acceleration, and also that we have a target to be climate neutral in 2050. So we can sort of deduct and count backwards from that. So that's a very hardly set target, and the sooner we start to take steps, the better for us and more benefits we will enjoy. And one important factor to see is that now the target is a net target, which means that domestic carbon removals, for example, forests, wetlands, peatlands, which absorb carbon from the atmosphere, can be accounted for to reach this target. So they actually decrease the target the way it is now. And to utilize the full decarbonization potential, these things must come on top of the reduction efforts. So one way to get more reduction is not to account for this and use the full potential of both of these measures.
Good. I mean, I always believe that luckily we are not living in a fully planned economy, and we see a jump of e-cars sales in Germany in the last year of 430%. And no one would have, predicted that. So, sometimes it can go quite fast if you have the right framework. We have more questions, but actually, maybe, Andreas, I wanted to ask you just before we go into the questions, because you said about, different kinds of instruments we are using. Regulatory policies, markets, so on. So can you a little bit explain where do we use what and what is useful, or how what is going to happen here? Who can use what can member states do? What can we ask member states to do to understand better the policy surrounding?
Sure. So I think it's important that often it's debated as a kind of either or question, regulatory standards or carbon pricing, whereas we think that in every single sector, it's in regulatory standards and carbon pricing discussion. You need both, and maybe some examples. So for transport, what we can do with the CO2 standards, and we should do them as ambitiously as possible, including a target for 2025, so we're not waiting until the last moment to accelerate, is we can incentivize manufacturers, or actually require them, to create products and only put products on the market that actually meet certain benchmarks. They have to phase out their fossil fuel fleet. But that really only regulates the new cars on the market in first instance with the CO2 standards. So we can phase in new cars quicker, and they have different lifespans of between 8 and 15 years on average, depending on country, depending on different factors who's using them. But what this means, and just how the stock is turned over time, that we will still have a lot of cars on the market, even if we do very ambitious CO2 standards for cars, even if we did it through other standards of, forcing them off the road in cities, etc. We will still have those old cars if we don't have other solutions for them. So in this instance, we believe that carbon pricing is actually one of the very important elements to make sure that that fuel demand for the old cars is still actually also being addressed, that those cars are being used efficiently, that the plug-in hybrids that are being phased in now, which is a bit of a catastrophe, and often with very little electric range, are actually being plugged in and charged as opposed to just being hybrids. And so, this is I think the challenge. We need to work on both fronts, getting the new stuff in the market, setting the framework for manufacturers to be able to do that with clarity, and also just deciding to some extent, okay, here's your benchmark. Maybe some, there will be some Porsche e-fuel cars for some rich millionaires, but in the end, it's largely going to be EVs for the mass market. And that the standard will make that clear. And the same is true for industry and buildings. We will need to phase in heat pumps and district heating, and we will need to do that also with standards. We will need to require building owners, landlords, and private building owners to renovate, especially the least efficient buildings first. That protects tenants. We need those regulations. We need the regulations also on the rental market, but we also need the incentive, because it needs to be a bankable item. Otherwise, how can you tell a landlord that is being required to renovate their building to not invest into a gas boiler when it's actually the economically wise decision? You need both. But to be clear, we know also from the modeling, and this is the first instance when you look at just the high economic level, we know it's affordable. We know we can do it. That is not in question. It's which measures actually accomplish it and which measures have a fair burden sharing so that it's actually socially acceptable for all and gives the manufacturers the clear incentives and vision that they need to deliver.
Susanna, I wanted to ask you, I always get this question, so if we are having so high prices of CO2 emissions, do we want to kick out industry from Europe, or what is the idea behind it? Can you maybe explain to us if this is then actually killing industry?
Sure. So all the studies show that the carbon price so far has not forced industry to relocate. They have been cushioned to some extent from it, but not entirely. And when we've ran calls for evidence or discussed with industry, they very often, when they did relocate, they mentioned it was for labor costs or for other costs of operation, which were lower in other countries. So effectively, it's not because of climate policies. And just to add that over the last year, we've seen a lot of the biggest economies in the world committing to net zero goals, either by 2050 or by 2060. So now the whole conversation around carbon leakage has fundamentally changed, because you're not going, such an investment to relocate is actually a 30 years long investment that you're planning. So there's no point in relocating from Europe when you know that other jurisdictions are aiming exactly for the same goal around the same time. And of course, in Europe, what you also have, this is why I referred to the Innovation Fund earlier, is that you have the most amount of financial support to innovate and to meet the transition that you won't have elsewhere. So I think if I were right now in industrial planning my my investments for the next 30 years, I think Europe is probably the most attractive destination. However, industry in Europe continues to be too cushioned. It's too protected from environmental and climate policies, if you ask me. And there is a risk that when that happens, they sort of lose the appetite to join the race to innovate. And we're seeing that the countries that don't have so many blankets for industry to be so comfortable are actually joining the race from a different starting point, of course, but they're committed to let's say, having breakthrough innovation happen much faster, and they're taking it as a proper race. So we have to ensure both support, but also to make it very clear that, you know, that there will be a race for private capital as well, and Europe does need to be courageous and bold, and not rely too much on the support it gets in Europe. Yeah.
We have, broke it down to the sentence: if we want to keep what we have, we need to change. And,
yes.
And I think that's it. And actually, I think for us Greens, it is very interesting to think about the energy transition, and that we, you know, kickstarted the energy transition with some big also regulatory and subsidy supports. And now it's a big success story, and it kind of is all around the world. And the same should happen for industry. You know, we want to have the industry transformation starting now in Europe and not somewhere else. And this is what we can achieve with the ETS. Now, Brigitta, going back to the member states, you just said that, I mean, there was like the leaders, so the heads of states, they were not really able to agree on something. So now there is members from many different places of Europe here in the audience. So which one do you say, look, here are really big potentials for you, and which member states they can really gain from it, but also in which member states do we need to campaign and tell leaders, maybe when Greens are not in government, that they actually need to speed up?
Yeah, so a big question. So as I said, the main question, what it comes down now, is of course the distribution of the European-wide target. And unfortunately, what we see now is not a race to the top from the countries, but they are trying to do what they think it's the best for them to get the smallest share of the European target for the most reward. And we have seen this dynamic also in the international climate negotiations, so it's nothing new. Basically, the lower income member states, Central Eastern Europe, arguing that a too high carbon price, if the ETS would be extended, or a special ETS for road and buildings would be created, would impact their population, their households, worse than the more wealthier states. So they are against this, because they see there's going to be big social inequities between the member states, and they are demanding compensation, which from the latest speech from Ursula von der Leyen seemed that the Commission is willing to offer. And so this is one thing, that they are arguing that through the modernization fund, for example, they should get a bigger chunk. The question is, I think, what we can expect them to do in return. So I think it's fair to say that they need to make a bigger transformation of their energy system, for example. But then if they get the funds in return, they have to invest it in a 100% sustainable way. So don't spend it, for example, in fossil fuels or other fossil solutions. So there's kind of this these talks between the social aspects between member states and the cost effectiveness, which the Western, especially Germany, Denmark, and France, trying to push for. Because of course, if they have to do more, their costs will be significantly higher, because the cost of abatement of CO2 is higher in these member states. So as for Germany, for example, we have seen the latest developments of this court case and the German climate laws. For example, I don't see any reason for Germany not to support more ambition. So I think if there's somebody here from Germany, they should argue that Germany is ready and should be vocal and at the forefront of climate ambition in EU. And also this is true for the Nordic countries. And for the CE countries, I would argue that there's an opportunity for them now to transform their economy and enjoy the benefits. And especially we see from polls that the citizens in CE countries are very much for action, climate action. They are very worried about climate effects. So and they looking at their governments to act. And there's a lot of potential, especially in the building sector there. To renovate houses and create a lot of emission reductions from the building sector. So I see it as a good political package as well to say to the voters that we are assisting you with your change. We're gonna provide better living conditions, and this will also help to solve the climate problem.
So it could be a good deal. Higher carbon prices, but this money will be channeled to the east for investment.
Yeah.
Great. So thanks a lot. There are some questions now here in the chat, and I encourage you to write your questions in the chat or raise your hand if you have some, or if you have some contributions or comments. But Lisa wants to know, what about methane? We are talking a lot about CO2, but if we do not tackle methane, well, we can forget about the Paris Agreement. Who wants to tackle this question?
I'm happy to. So I think that's a very important point, and what we have since late last year is a kind of proposal of the Commission of how it wants to move forward with a methane strategy, which includes the plan to propose methane regulations for gas industry in Europe this year. Now, is that a good first step towards reducing methane in energy? Sure. That being said, the EU imports most of its natural gas, and a lot of the methane is also actually in coal beds. It's in the mining that we've been doing for our coal plants, for our industry, etc. Some of those are remaining liabilities that I'm not sure are actually being adequately addressed. So I hope that the regulation will also take very seriously the issue of coal bed methane, but also that we really only see it as let's say the starting shot of also actually wanting to be much more ambitious at international level. What we have with the Biden administration is, let's say, a more conducive environment to actually act on methane leakage. It certainly hasn't been the democratic administrations that have been the issue on methane regulation in the United States or globally. So we should see a return of methane regulations for production in the US. Hopefully those will be strict, but also more importantly, hopefully we'll be able to get into a conversation about how the EU can also, without too big of international repercussions, actually set strict standards for the gas that is being imported, so that actually the big market that the EU actually represents is setting a standard. And if in the future only Norway can fulfill this standard, well, then that's the only gas we should be importing. It's as clear as that. But you know, I don't want to be doing advertising for Statoil either. That was not the point of this intervention. And last but not least, I mean, of course, there's the agriculture dimension. In the end, methane will only decline if we're reducing our livestock, and that is a very difficult conversation, as we can see with the CAP negotiations at the moment. But we will get there eventually.
Great. I want to be a fanboy of the International Energy Agency right now, because they said that when we want to go for 1.5, no investments anymore into fossil, also not gas. Cornelia asked about the measurement. Can we measure if the reduction is going according to plan? I think it has two dimensions. One is like the actual measurements of CO2 emissions. Are we good enough in this? And then also like the reporting of it, for instance, in the frameworks and monitoring it. Who wants to take this one? Maybe in the ETS system, how do we measure the
So I'll answer that question, also referring to a previous question in the chat, which, apologies, I've only seen now, which was how does the ETS work? So technically, the ETS puts a cap on emissions, and it gives you a trajectory over how emissions will decrease until, let's say, your fixed point. Now, the problem that we have is that this trajectory is disconnected from our climate goals. So in that case, indeed, we need additional measures to actually measure how exactly we're going to meet and reduce the emissions. But ideally, in the upcoming ETS revision, we would also fix this cap so that emissions can't go above what we've agreed, so that they're on a steady declining trajectory to 2030, 40 and onwards, which is not the case at the moment. But this is the benefit of having such a cap and trade. And some of those wanting to expand it to incorporate more sectors could also argue that you might want to have the whole economy covered by such a cap, because the moment you actually make it fit to reach net zero in 2050 and you start from today's emissions, then you can certainly it's ensuring that you're going to get there. But this is not where we are in the EU at the moment, and hopefully we will be able to change that for the ETS sectors in the upcoming revision. So you build in the measurement in setting the roof on emissions.
Okay, and I mean the measurement. So measuring how much CO2 we emit is quite good. Question is then just to report and to actually react on whether when we do not reduce our CO2 emissions according to plan. And here we can be better in terms of also sanctioning this. It has to be more costly. Also member states have to get more sanctions. And also I just read some reports about companies that did not have ETS certificates even though they emitted. So also this should not happen. Lulu Cf. What is Lulu Cf? I mean, I hear this all the time, but what is Lulu Cf and what is at stake? I don't know if I don't know if you, Brigitta, Andreas.
I can shortly say that Lulu Cf is the emissions from land use change and forestry. So this is what the acronym stands for. So basically is agriculture, forestry, and managed land, and also the thing which is carbon removals from forests, and also any kind of ecosystem. And what was the second part of the question? So what is at stake? Basically removals need to be protected and even increased in order to reach our climate target and to protect our planet. This, of course, has manifold advantages, not just from the climate point of view, but from the point of view of the health of the whole planet and ecosystem. And one of the cornerstones that I already mentioned, that the separate target for this sector needs to be set. So it should not be mixed with the reduction target. It must come on top. And it needs to be linked with the biodiversity strategy to protect the living ecosystems of our planet. And so there is a separate regulation. The emissions and removals from these sectors were a little bit outside of the system so far. And the EU tends to keep it that way. And if that's the case, they need to have a strict separate target and the strict measures. And also to connect to the previous question, how we actually measure the removals and the progress towards emission reductions. This has come down to a lot of reporting and calculations and reference levels, as they say. And this is also the case of the Lulu Cf regulation. The accounting needs to be fixed there to be true to the reality and be very honest and transparent, and so we can see how for example, forests grow and are protected.
And I always have a little bit of a horror scenario now when I hear about carbon farming, so that you have the ETS, so a price system and a market, and you get, like, I don't know, 100 euros for 1 ton of CO2, so that in the future, and then you can create this carbon credits by removing CO2 from the atmosphere. So then my horror scenario is that on top of an industrialized agricultural sector, we have an industrialized carbon farming sector. And I think that would not work with a lot of biodiversity and renaturalization, but it would be more like, again, industrialized. So maybe that's just a horror scenario, but it always comes to my mind when I hear carbon farming.
If I may, I mean, I do think that is a very real possibility if we don't do the proper risk assessment. That being said, I do think that this current target under discussion is an incredible opportunity, because where do we stand today? We stand in a situation where our Lulu Cf sink is decreasing and member states project them to decrease. So we're actually in the point where if the Lulu Cf sink went to where member states are currently projecting they will go, we will fail our target because it won't add up to 55%, even with the separate sink target. That's where we are at the moment. So you know, we need to steer around, and whether that's at least holding our current sink or radically improving it, I think we need to be very clear on the fact that we're going in absolutely the wrong direction. Our forests, our soils are becoming increasingly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, and we need to make them more resilient. So it is the opportunity to have a conversation about how we actually create a framework for that. And so far, the Lulu Cf regulation has not been that. It has been a paper accounting instrument, and not a very good one at that.
Yes. So last question, Horace, please, the floor is yours.
Sticking to the big picture here again, I think the big challenge is that now with the European climate law, we have an emission target that is not, strictly speaking, 1.5 degree compatible. And I heard your perspectives that were slightly different on to what extent we could use the Fit for 55 package to change that. Now, assuming that we can't realistically use the package to change that and to go beyond the current 2030 target, what other measures, if any, do you see for us to push beyond it? Because, I mean, otherwise, if the EU of all the big emitters can't do more than this, then we really don't have a whole lot of chances of sticking to 1.5. And a question related to that is to what extent the EU could use its leverage to push other big emitters to do more.
Do I hear a little bit of a question on CBAM in terms of pushing other big emitters to do more?
I'm glad to pick up on the question and finally comment on the CBAM as well. The point is that indeed the target is not aligned with 1.5, and it has other issues as well. And the idea is that you can still go beyond the target. So, for example, the 2020 target was set as a political communication exercise, 2020 by 2020, which was then met in 2014. And we're actually building in Europe on a history of extremely unambitious targets because they're politically acceptable, or that they speak to, they become the lowest common denominator in the EU. But that doesn't mean we can't go beyond it. So in fact, even the German Constitutional Court decision from 2 weeks ago effectively raises the bar for the rest of Europe. It's not going to be the last case on this. So when we will look back in 2030, we will very likely will have reached the target early again. Also because innovation rollout is happening much faster. I mean, everyone was historically wrong on the cost of renewables. They dropped much quicker than anyone expected them to drop. So we do have markets that are reacting incredibly quickly. We have loads of potential for reductions in Central Eastern Europe, and you actually do have mechanisms even within the effort sharing regulation to accelerate that. If the Commission wanted to, it would have exactly the articles in the regulation to actually properly boost up projects in the region. So we can actually, it's up to us. And most certainly, if we don't actually increase the level with the sectorial legislation, then I mean, it's going to be a couple of sad years ahead for Greens in Europe. So I don't think that's the case at all. I think the Green movement is growing strong, and there's a lot of support, a lot of knowledge being built up, capacity all around Europe. So I think we have the wind in our sails, and we should persevere, because indeed it's going to be needed. And yes, CBAM has a huge potential, also because it proposes something really interesting. The Parliament report proposes that we count for Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions when we price. So that has a huge impact on even imports of LNG and other sorts of imports to the EU. Because if you are to actually do what the Parliament report recommends, and you're looking at emissions from extraction to use to manufacturing, consumption, process emissions, you're actually looking at a whole new landscape of very seriously tackling greenhouse gas emissions around the world. So it's really critical that we do secure a carbon border adjustment quite close to the one that the Parliament recommends. I suspect it will still be further from that, but indeed we need to bring the world with us. The EU Green Deal should be only an example for how others can do it and improve it, but we have to bring others along.
So the way we can, so Oras, I think it's good that you asked again, because the message should not be we cannot overachieve it. We have always overachieved, so we will do it again, but only with strong Greens. And there I want to give the floor to Rihanna and Gabor, because they will tell us a bit what are the campaigns of us Greens in order to make the Fit for 55 a Fit for 1.5 package.
Sure. Thanks, Micha, and thanks also to all the speakers for your inputs. I think it's been a really good conversation, and there's just so much to cover. So hopefully we'll be able to pick this up again. For the EGP today, as part of our council, we had an action live and in person in Brussels for the first time in forever to save the Green Deal, because I think, as Micha also mentioned at the beginning, this package and kind of these next pieces are key to making sure that we can actually achieve the being fit for 2030 and being the fitness people, as part of that, we have an Instagram filter so that even if you couldn't be at the action today in person, you can still take part virtually, and I will leave a link in the chat. And then we're also right now, together with Tilt, campaigning against the Energy Charter Treaty, which is also a whole nother complex topic. So I won't go too much into depth, but you'll be able to read more at the link as well. But the negotiations for this are taking place again next week. And so we're running a campaign to send letters to our energy ministers to raise awareness of this topic as well, since the Energy Charter Treaty is a way to block the phase out of fossil fuels. And as Andreas said, we need to be kind of working on multiple levels in terms of what policies we use to get to the action we need. So I'll drop a link and then I would hand over to Gabor.
Hello everyone. The Olympic Games of that collaborative race will be in Glasgow in November, and so there will be hopefully many climate fitness people, and on the road to COP we have to save the Green Deal, and we will focus on three things. First of all, the higher carbon floor price, and the combustion engine ban, and the kerosene taxation. It is also a part of the energy taxation directive revision. And on the road, there are key milestone in Milan on the pre-COP, and also in the European Ideas Lab organized by the EGP and the Greens EFA on the climate and the biodiversity. All of you will be invited there, and hopefully we will meet you there on the road to COP. And please reach us with Rihanna if you would like to be a part of this campaign.
Great. Thank you very much. So it is for me only to say thank you to all of the wonderful speakers for giving us your input, for explaining to us how this difficult construction of the Green Deal then works, and how actually it affects our lives. And I understood from this session that it affects our lives and citizens' lives a lot. This is basically the framework where, really the change happens for cars, for buildings, for energy prices, for agriculture. So everywhere where CO2 or other GHG gases are emitted, this will be tackled. Is it enough to reach the 1.5 degree temperature goal? No, that means there is still a place for us Greens. That would also be funny if we would not have a place there, but we still have to improve it. We have to speed it up. We actually have to make it real, because especially when I look into industry transformation, not a lot of things are currently being discussed by the Commission. So a lot of work to do, but also huge opportunities for us Greens to really decarbonize fast and much faster. And as I said before, when we start things, then sometimes it goes much faster than we think. Then the energy transition is a very good example, but also if you look now into the sales of electronic cars, that goes much faster than we thought. So if we are pushing for it, then things happen. And this is what we are going to do in the next years. And I guess you will hear much more also in the different sectors, what is going to be discussed. But watch Europe. Europe is the place, the EU level, where the most significant climate policy changes will happen in this year. And so we need your support. We need member states. We need strong Greens in order to make the Green Deal the success story that it should be. Thanks a lot, and enjoy the rest of this beautiful council. And I hope the next time we meet for the EGP Council, we will meet in person again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a nice afternoon. Bye.